Well, Tommy, it's very nice to be here in the salubrious settings of this wonderful Italian restaurant in Rochester, where you live and where you do your composing.
Oh, thank you very much, Peter. Yes, I'm a regular here, and it's often the ideas come flowing over a pizza or a pasta. It's such a delight to be talking to Peter today. Peter is a fantastic composer and conductor, an all-round musician, and pianist, organist, many other facets. And we've known each other a while, haven't we?
I don't know how many years now, but yes, since you were a young teenager, and I've sort of followed your career and watched various musical things that you did, particularly when you were a young organist at university and doing some outrageous things on the chapel organ in Cambridge. But what a family you come from as well, a dynasty of string players.
Oh, you're very kind. Well, coming back to those videos at university, something I've always been fascinated with is rich harmony. And this is why I love your music so much, because you have this sense of melody and beautiful use of harmony underneath. And it's slightly different to what, one might expect from some of the other composers. It's just terribly beautiful and honest. I wanted to ask you, because you began as a singer, does that influence your writing in any way?
I think it completely does, because especially when I don't write for I don't write chamber music. I write for choirs, and I tend to just write for for simple resources. I want the music to be performed more than once, so it's not going to be something that could only be sung by the BBC singers. It's got to be accessible, but within that, I think that I truly do understand the musical lines, the length of a breath that a singer can take, and the ranges. But it's not just the range. It's not just saying, you don't want to write the tenor above a G. It's what vowel sound are they singing when they're on the note? How long can they sustain it? It's just a whole lot of stuff that is just naturally done, I think, and I notice when I sing other people's music, I think, I wish they had known a bit more about singing. So I have faults, but I don't think that's one of them.
And that was an excerpt of your Shepherds Are Kneeling, which is a beautiful theme. And how did you write that?
Oh, thank you. Well, I just, to be honest, I'm very fond of John Rutter the man and John Rutter the music, and I just thought, what might John Rutter have done? Now, John may listen to this and think, I wouldn't have written that, but to be honest, I felt that I felt inspired to write the words and the music, which is me all over, and by doing that, I could actually just weave the melody in so that I could sing. So the tune, I could fit the words in. You stars on that holy night. It's
beautiful.
Just
and you've got the shepherds at the beginning, reminding me of Berlioz a little bit.
That's it. It's a little tune for the shepherds.
Lovely.
I'm glad you like it.
Lovely word setting, yeah. And from your experience as conductor, because of course you were directing music at Worcester Cathedral and Chelmsford and Croydon originally, Croydon Minster.
Well, it's called Croydon Minster. It was good old CPC in my day, Croydon Parish Church, yes.
And so what's, having conducted choirs at different levels and different ways over the course of the church year, has that kind of given you an awareness of the amateur choirs as well as the professional choirs that you work with?
I would say yes, but I mean, more than that, what it has done is given me an awareness of what's actually required liturgically. You know, where are the weaknesses? What sort of thing do choirs need now? I mean, for example, you know, every single service, it seems, in a parish church now, in an Anglican parish church, is a service of Holy Communion, and therefore we need, the Anglican Church probably needs more communion motets than it needs anything else. It doesn't need many more Magnificats and Nunc Dimittises because choirs aren't singing choral evensong. So
publishers tell me that Easter is kind of underwritten, that, you know, there needs to be more Easter repertoire for choirs. Have you found that sort of gap as well, I think?
Yes, and in fact recently I've sort of come into a very nice sort of setup where I'm actually working with a choir of limited resources in a parish church locally to me, and I found actually finding something for them to sing on Easter Day was nigh on impossible.
Really?
Yeah, and I think if I had realised that it was going to be so different, I probably would have so difficult rather, I would probably have composed something myself. But then I think, you know, there we have Wesley, who wrote Blessed be the Godfather. You know, that's great, and but I don't know that it would have been absolutely right for my sort of parish choir of a dozen people and a dozen, you know, enthusiastic amateur singers.
There's a particular anthem of yours which I love, and I think it's been performed a lot around the world. I think I'm right in saying A New Commandment. Peter, that was a really lovely recording of A New Commandment, which is one of my favourite melodies I think you've written. And who was singing that? That was...
do you know, it was actually the Rochester Cathedral Choir.
Beautiful.
And here we are sitting in Rochester.
Absolutely wonderful.
You know, whilst I might want in life to be known as, you know, the finest solo countertenor Britain never quite heard, or, you know, or one of the best organists or conductors, the fact is, I think I will go to my grave as the person who wrote I Give to You a New Commandment, and that took sort of 20 minutes of my life, and that is quite interesting, because what comes out of that is the question of, you know, how you compose, and you know, for me that was something which, it was a very specific need for, again, it was a text, you know, I give you a new commandment that you love one another, and I wrote the tune, and then very quickly wrote it. I was told by the person who had sort of commissioned it. It was an interesting one. It was like so many, it was a commission where the fee's never discussed and then never emerges. But you know, it was.
We all have those.
You know, write a piece of music where the sopranos are never higher than an E, where if there are choirs without men, they don't, you know, you don't need the men's part, where it's no more than 4 sharps or flats, where the stipulation that it mustn't be over a certain length of time, and so I came up with this, which probably took, you know, 20 minutes, and then I suddenly realised, and I don't know why, but I realised that what I had written, I could actually put the plain song of the Ubi Caritas underneath.
It's beautiful,
and that's the thing. So I let the men sing the plain song of the Ubi Caritas, which is the text, and in Latin. Well, I don't know whether this was going on in my head subconsciously, but with a little bit of shoehorning the plain song in, it all fitted together, and it's sort of, I suppose it gives it a sort of gravitas of blending the old and new. It's extremely popular. I still get messages. I get messages from people throughout the world saying, this is my favourite anthem. Somebody in North Carolina or something saying, this is my favourite anthem, and my daughter chose it for her wedding, and I'm going to have the choir sing it at my mother's funeral next week, and that sort of thing. It's sort of, it really touches people, and I'm glad. But as I say, what it means is that I'll go down in history as the man who wrote I Give to You a New Commandment. And I think I know what you might go down in history for.
Oh no, please.
Because I think you probably ought to tell people if they don't know. Tommy, go on. Now's the time to admit all.
Just one more note on that.
Yes, I'm not letting off with this.
Okay, I think it's the fact, this is my impression, is that the fact I Give You a New Commandment is so successful because it feels like it's that sort of OUP house style, beautiful melody, and then suddenly you bring in this timeless nostalgia, this timelessness of this, Gregorian chant, and it's just, to me, it really touches the soul. It's very, very powerful.
I'm pleased you recognise that, and I was surprised that it did that, but it's been lovely to know that it has touched people,
Well, that's so special. I'm afraid to admit, yes, I'm the composer of Funny Song, which you study for years and you write music. You really want to write for many years, and then of course, just like Peter's A New Commandment, 20 minutes in front of the computer and a bit of let's say dicking around, with kind of funny voices and speeding things up, slowing things down, and sixth and seventh chords actually in the piano, because I figured that wonderful French sort of chanson sound, with lovely sixths and sevenths, boom, ching, boom, chung, it's not just pa, it's got a little bit of flavour in it, because you've got effectively 2 or 3 piano parts kind of superimposed, but it's the sevenths and the sixths. So I'm hoping, that's probably, that's my hope that people like it because it's got 6th and 7th chords. I'm sure it's not that. It's probably just because it's a sillier sound.
Well, they don't know that's why they like it. That is why they like it. They just don't know that's why they like it.
I've got a question for you, Peter. When you're writing, because of course, I'm interested in the process as much as you are. When you're writing, at what point do you kind of let go, and what does it feel like once your music is out in the world? And do you feel like ownership of it, or do you feel it's kind of gone from your process?
That's quite interesting, because of course when you're writing for as I do, very practically just write for churches, so sometimes it's a hymn tune, sometimes it's a psalm chant, which for those who don't know is just a series of chords, it's which are repeated over and over again to the words of a psalm and used in choral evensong, or a set of responses or a Magnificat. What I feel is that almost as soon as it's written and it's gone, it's completely in the public domain. And I've wandered into cathedrals and thought, oh, that's quite nice. And somebody said, well, that's your psalm chant. And I, oh, really? And I have no feeling of ownership. And, if for example, let's say somebody had changed a note in it, I would just think, oh, I hadn't thought of doing that. I have no, once it's there, it's sort of in the public domain. It feels that the music has gone, and in fact, I don't keep anything either. I'm very old-fashioned, Tommy. I'm not like you. I say things very modern, I sit down with a pencil and paper and scratch my head, and then fiddle on the piano, and then go and sit at the desk, and then make myself a cup of tea, and then think about doing it again in a fortnight's time. It's a long process. I haven't composed a lot of things in life, and it takes a long time. I think if I were possibly completely reliant on composing for my income, I would lock myself in a room and do it, and I probably might even know how to set music on a computer of my own. As it is, I send the scores to somebody else who transforms them into something, and I am always amazed at A, how quickly they do it, and B, how beautiful it looks. Then I rip everything else up and hope that somebody's going to publish it. I mean, maybe you could tell me about, you know, the your process as well. I mean, I'd be interested to know. You presumably don't start with a pencil and paper. I don't know.
Well, actually, do you know what I do? A lot of maybe 50% of the time.
Wow. Tommy, that was just wonderful. That I think that was your Oculi Omnium, which is just very close to my heart. The setting of the text, and is, of course, unaccompanied music is just what I love more than anything else. It's very touching, beautiful to hear it.
You're very kind, Peter. That was actually written in a little French farmhouse with a bottle of wine. The sun was streaming in just like today, and it was just that sort of beautiful diatonic kind of sound just came out. You see, it's a very sort of hopefully legato and beautiful setting of that wonderful text. When you're in commercial mode and you're just churning it out, you know, and actually for me the commercial music, or the sort of, you know, the useful music, I suppose, and actually that's something that Richard Rodney Bennett talks about, who's my hero. The fact that music can be useful, that, you know, you can be filling a gap for a particular audience, or for a particular player, or for kids, or for adults, or for amateurs, as well as the sort of symphonies, etc., and as atonal music. But for me, the process is the same, but the actual mechanics of how it's put together are very different, because of course commercial music, you've got to present, you know, the final master ready to broadcast, or to be, and it's got to be recorded. So, you know, there are so many composers now in their bedrooms, because computing and samples have got so cheap. There are so many hundreds of thousands of composers sitting in their bedrooms just writing music into the computer, kind of what I call doodling. And I'm not a huge fan of this, because you can end up with music that's very noodly and doesn't really go anywhere. The emotion can be absolutely on the nail, because, you know, obviously the sort of lowest common denominator sort of commercial music functions, it does what it needs to do.
Yes.
But for me, and I'm sure you're the same, you know, it's always the music that within the brief, whatever the brief is, does something a little bit further, or a little bit interesting. You know, your melodies go, you know, don't always go as predicted. You know, some other composers might be very predictable, but yours always go, you know, and I'm always trying to pack stuff in the same way that sort of does something a little bit unexpected within the brief. Does that make any sense?
Yes, and I appreciate that, because as soon as you say that, what I'm thinking of is the operas of Benjamin Britten, and when there are these great great long crescendos, and the climax is never what you sort of want it to be,
yes,
or what you think it's going to be. He takes you somewhere else, and there's, you know, and I think that there's one particular one in Billy Budd that I remember, and I just think that it's sort of I just think, oh, I wish he would do that, and I think, no, I'm so pleased he doesn't do it. He doesn't take it to that, you know, what I expect, the natural, the normal, yes, which is what you would get if you're watching a sort of Hollywood film.
Quite agree. Agree.
You get that. There's too much satisfaction in that, and Britain doesn't give you the satisfaction. I think what you're saying is you don't give people that satisfaction either.
I think you're right. I mean, I agree with that. I do feel sometimes with Britain that he doesn't emotionally give everything. and I kind of occasionally want him to give everything.
Yes.
Peter Grimes is amazing in that he gives
Yes.
everything, and it's got that richness. But sometimes he's sort of not quite he's holding himself back a bit, I feel.
Yes.
But a master craftsman, I mean, just amazing.
It's interesting, you're just talking about Britain. Britain had one distinction, I think, over lots of the composers today, and I don't know what you feel about this, but to my mind, he was of a generation, sort of the last of the generation of composers who got completely actively involved in their own music. He conducted, Walton conducted.
Absolutely.
They all did their own music. Mozart.
James Macmillan does.
James does, yes. Tom Addis, I think.
Tom
does
Addis,
that. It's not that there aren't, composers who conduct, but I do feel there is a sense in which it is. What can happen now is you can commission a large orchestral work, and then some genius sitting in Eastern Europe will set all this, and you'll have an hour and 15 minutes of extraordinary score of music, and this score, as you send your money to the person who's composed it, the score arrives on your doorstep like a sort of like dog dirt,
right.
And you scrape it off, you open it up, and you realise that this is something that you're going to have to deal with. You look at the score, you have no idea how it sounds by looking at it, and there's no help. And I think that that's where somebody like James Macmillan comes in. But I mean, what would your when you do a piece like the one that you quite recently did for Rochester Choral Society for a sort of anniversary of theirs, and based on various historic events that happened in Rochester. What would your involvement with something like that be? Does your creative involvement finish when you deliver the score?
Not at all. I mean, I think in the same way that Britten was a pianist, and he was a very, very beautiful pianist, I try to be very active with the production of the piece, and I took a choir rehearsal for the quite an early stage, actually, because John, the conductor, who's wonderful, couldn't make it, and he asked if I would, graciously ask if I would go and take it, and had a fantastic evening, actually teaching it to the singers, and working with them. And then,
but that dynamic for them, I mean, for them to have any, when the composer comes along, especially if it's a new work, how much more they will respond.
Quite right, and actually
incredible.
Being willing to change things, and I quite like to involve them in the process. And, we decided we might change a note here or there, and that's fine. And when it gets to the performance, having the orchestration. By that point I hadn't orchestrated, so I was judging things, changing things as we went and adapting the textures, and I'm sure you do the same with having worked with a choir the first time. You might adapt a texture. Do you find that you occasionally tweak
and
things?
I also remember working as a young singer, working on a concert that Kenneth Layton was conducting, and it was a concert of his music. And it was all published music by Kenneth Layton, OUP, and he was stopping and saying, tenors, that completely doesn't work, put that up the octave, just put these two bars up the octave, and cut that out. Sopranos, don't sing that bit, but come in there along with the tenors. Join, actually sing with them. And I thought there was a creative process going on a piece that, what that did was to give me the ability to sort of note it down in the score, so that when I then did it, I said, now I know that Kenneth Layton like this because I was involved in a process. So, but
it's fantastic.
But actually, you can't do it. Otherwise, we would all be saying, well, when you were doing Bach's cantata such and such, you can just leave the trumpet part out because, I was there when Bach did it, and he only had one trumpet, not two, and all that sort of thing. But actually, there comes a point, I think, where you're the only person as the composer, you're the only person who can actually do that.
It's very interesting, isn't it? My grandfather Tony on my dad's side was a composer, and he studied with Nadia Boulanger, but he was kind of post-Leighton, and he treated composing, the act of composing, almost, I suppose, as a sort of therapy. It was kind of like he was pouring his whole soul into it, and you get this very dark music, and you get really high soprano parts, and he'd be sort of working with them saying, come on sopranos, come on you old ladies, get this, and actually you've got to have a more practical approach, I think, to make music that is, yes, genuine to what you want to write, but also is practical. Because at the end of the day, I don't know about you, I worked with theatre a little bit, and seeing that a piece of theatre is only worth the living theatre that is embodied in that show, and it requires people to run that theatre, and it's constantly evolving. Theatre can't really be just a script, in the same way a piece of music is evolving. It's in the moment, isn't it? So we've got to be very practical about creating a moment that is doable, is singable.
And I think also, thinking of theatre, Mozart was writing for theatre and the opera, and the chorus parts are terribly simple, and of course, as we know, anything that's big with the trumpets is in C major because they were military trumpets and they were simple. They were, they're simple parts. They're only playing, 3 or 4 notes. The chorus is singing, but my goodness, if he suddenly has an aria for, a mezzo soprano and a clarinet, they're off. So it is actually writing for your resources as well, and that's that's where you come in,
isn't it? So we've mentioned a new commandment, and you've got some other lovely pieces that have been performed widely as well. There's the Mass of St. Ced, isn't there?
The Mass of St. Ced is not a choral piece. It's not for a choir. It's for a choir and a congregation. It's quite widely sung in the Anglican Communion now, and which pleases me. And I heard it a lot. Certainly during COVID, I realised how many places were singing it, because of course it can just be sung by a cantor as well, and lots of when things were very restricted in worship, there were cantors and a cantor and an organist singing the Mass of St. Ced, and knowing that people at home would recognise it, and that would have some sort of connection for them at a very difficult time. When they weren't allowed to go to church, or if they were, they certainly weren't allowed to sing. And I think that that's a long time ago now. I wrote it for the congregational service in Chelmsford Cathedral well over 20 years ago. I don't know if they still sing it there, but it would be nice to think they do. But I know that many of the churches in that part of the sort of London boroughs that are part of the Diocese of Chelmsford in Essex and also in London do sing the Mass. It's simple and it's accessible. I think, as a listener as well.
And you've written a modern mass, you've written a recent mass, haven't you, with beautiful Scotch snaps, if I remember. It's got that sort of Scottish Celtic.
Yes, it's not real Celtic music. It's just sort of that lots of it's in 6/8.
But it
so
feels,
it sort of goes dum dee da dee dum dee dum dee dee dee. So you know, it sort of feels like the Sky Boat, except you never get on the boat. You know. The Sky Boat song. Sorry.
So, are there any unpublished pieces or ideas you've got lying around? I only ask because I have a whole room of just papers, you know, and occasionally I dip in. But I've heard that, now was it Prokofiev had a drawer, A, B, C, D, you know, and he'd put an A theme in the A drawer, and then if he needed to write a symphony, he could just go, right, I need an A and a B, and maybe a C as the third subject, you know, and it's very interesting to hear that sort of stuff. But how do you work? Do you have spare music?
No, absolutely not. No. I have... I have a little book with spare jokes, and if I think of something that I think is funny, I write it in the book, and I might never say it again, but by writing it in the book, I suppose I sort of commit it to some sort of memory.
I say Peter is one of the funniest people I know. You know, is a very...
Well, I think I'm hiding my light under a bushel as we talk today. But yes, perhaps I should do that with themes because they do come. But I'm also I'm aware that I write music and words together, and I don't really like being constricted by other people's text in a way. It seems a bit strange to say that, but I like the rhythm of words, and I like to compose the words and then fit a tune to them. So quite a number of my published hymns actually have, you know, music by Peter Nardone, words by Peter Nardone, because I feel that the whole thing becomes a sort of unity, and they're linked, which is why I absolutely hate people mucking about with tunes that have a particular, you know, a tune that has a particular feel, perhaps a Passiontide tune or something that's Easter, and then they set it, you know, they just decide that it's going to have words from Trinity or Christmas, or and suddenly everything gets a bit muddled up.
I think we should probably say that there's nothing worse than a text that's been ratcheted onto a tune, or vice versa. You know, there are so many examples of sort of modern hymns where the tune and the melody just don't fit. One of them is "What Child Is This" with Greensleeves, which is my pet hate. What child is this who laid to... It just doesn't work, and that was actually why I wrote that carol setting. And yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, with regards from Rochester, this recent piece I wrote, I actually wrote all the texts, and I had a whole year to do it. So I just went to the archives here in Medway and just really researched everything, and it was totally organic. You know, finding the feel of each movement and the text, and then, as you say, crafting it out of that. But the only time it's worked, you know, with a new text by somebody else and words by, you know, when it's really gelled. So the other day I had a paella, covered those down with Gordon Giles, who's the Canon Chancellor here at Rochester, and he is a brilliant wordsmith, and over a paella we in an hour we wrote 2 Christmas carols, completely new melody, completely new text, and they just completely cohesively came together. I've never had that before I've had wonderful collaborators who have written great things and it's worked, you know, but with Gordon we literally did it on the fly, and it was very exciting.
Yes, but that's 2 people becoming one at one point. You didn't have just you know, somebody that you really like who then sends you something that they've written, and you say, oh, that's wonderful, this is really good, and then you sit there and struggle slightly. This is it's suddenly just a creative process between 2, which has never, you know, you 2 have never created together before, and you know, you've given birth to twin Christmas carols, and that's just wonderful.
So Peter, have you found that you've had to write, so you had to set existing texts for particular commissions? Because that has had, I mean, that does happen as a composer, doesn't it? You have to try and find the integrity in that process. but it's a different challenge, isn't it? It's not always as fulfilling, but
yes, I think that anybody who went through my works and listened to them would work out pretty quickly which are the texts that I had a trouble with, because then they're quite well crafted, they work, but they're not quite unified.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's not.
I understand.
It's not just with me. You can spot them. You can spot the commissions with famous composers. You can spot the commissions that were slightly uncomfortable for them.
I agree.
And there are others. For example, Bernstein's Chichester Psalms. What wonderful settings of the Hebrew, but he was involved in the process of the choice of these things. I'm interested in that because, of course, it's called the Chichester Psalms, and yet it's sung everywhere. Your piece about Rochester is very particular for Rochester. Now, you seem to me to be somebody who you need to, you're dare I say, a young man. He's very young,
I'm nearly 40.
40 is very young. Now, a young man with a young family and a mortgage to pay, and yet you commit to writing a piece for Rochester which is from your heart and wonderful, but how is it going to be published, and how is it going to stand up, unless you do it in Rochester in the USA? It's not going to really work in Aberdeen or Scunthorpe or Glasgow or Carlisle. So how would you get round that, or do you just take that as it's a very good my
point.
Gift to the
yes,
city?
No, it's a very good point. Well, Rochester Choral Society had their 150th anniversary this year, so it was a big anniversary for them, and they did want something to celebrate that. And I remembered a quote by Britten. It's a very Britten thing to say, but he apparently said every piece of music is an occasional piece, which is very Britten, and he meant everything was written for an occasion. And I really was very passionate about Rochester. We actually moved here on a whim 2.5 years ago. Because we found this kind of we drew a sort of radius of around my wife's work. She's a nurse in the NHS, and we sort of came upon Rochester because there was a house with a bit more space, and I had a studio in my house, so we needed a little bit more space than we had, and we've got a second kid on the way now. And the thing about it was I'd had very warm childhood memories of coming to Rochester on school trips. We found out, my dad dug some photos out of my brother and I when we were about 7 and 9 on the castle, on the top of the castle, and my mum sunbathing the day before she gave birth to my youngest son. So my youngest son, that would be wrong. My youngest brother. So
well, he's not entirely unheard of in Rochester.
Very much. So we had very fond memories, and also the dockyard, which is a big, favourite thing of my son's, actually, to go, my actual son, to go on a Saturday morning and play. There's so much wonderful history, and Dickens, of course.
Yes, but I do remember you contact me. I mean, you quite often run things by me, which is I'm very touched by this. But you sent me the link to the house you were going to buy, and the first thing that came into my mind was, it's absolutely identical to the types of house that are in Dulwich, which is your real home. And I thought, this is just absolutely right. It's
interesting, isn't it? So
architecturally, it's exactly
there's something about that. We do feel comfort in a sense of place, don't we? And that's something I was trying to actually shoehorn into regards from Rochester, this feeling that where we are does influence our lives in so many ways, and it's something we thought about a lot, because of course Rochester has this beautiful town, city, cathedral city feel. It's not actually a city, but it has this cathedral feel, and obviously the outskirts are very different, and it's got this kind of, so I felt like, yes, it did give me a sense of comfort that we were moving to a sort of similar sort of situation, and to a sort of house to where we were. But actually, my wife is very keen on older houses. I'm not actually a material person. I particularly mind where we are, but we're very lucky.
But without pressing the point, how do you think this piece can fly outside of the Medway?
Well, so we have a plan to record it, and what I've tried to do in the texts, we're talking about texts, was build in relevance for everybody, and almost using Rochester as a kind of metaphor for everything that we experience in our lives. I've tried to really build in some quite complex psychology as well, and all sorts of things to do with the world today and AI and all sorts of stuff really, and the importance of education and music education, and bring all this together. So I'm hoping it appeals to people, but it's tuneful.
Yes, it is tuneful. I'll grant you that. But would you feel, I'm just thinking, recently I wrote a very short motet, words and music, for some friends, very lovely friends who were getting married, and then I was asked whether I would consider setting a text for Christ's Passion, for Lent. So I spoke to the couple and said, what do you feel about it? And they said, well, that's all right. But so I just changed the text slightly so that it was suitable for use in the church, which it wasn't. It was not about. It didn't really have any Christian values. It was a bit more. It was about. It was, I suppose, where grows the tree of love. It was, and.
Very nice.
And it's a sort of by getting permission to do it, I sort of changed it enough. Do you feel that you would allow yourself that, because composers have always reused and adapted, do you think that you would be doing the Rochester Choral Society a disservice by, rewriting it, perhaps changing the title so that it could be published? Have you tried to have it published?
So
too many questions.
No,
Tommy,
it's all very interesting. It's all stuff that's in our minds as composers,
yeah.
isn't it? So publishers aren't particularly interested in regards from Rochester because it's so occasional.
It sounds like a Christmas card, doesn't it?
Yes. I mean,
they have it in lights, don't they? At Christmas time, regards from Rochester.
I was a big fan of
Happy Christmas from Rochester.
Yeah, no, quite. I mean, I love the Clive James travel documentaries from the 80s and 90s. A postcard from. I thought he was a brilliant journalist, and I think also that the Rochester has elements that are very exportable. I mean, we were in Italy over Easter, and they were talking about.
Oh yes, I was in Italy over Easter as well. I just thought I'd throw that in.
Just throw that in. My wife's Italian. We weren't. Actually...
I wasn't in Italy with his wife, I must say.
No. So one of the local writers we know was talking about Charles Dickens and how he'd stayed in our particular town we were in, and there was this lovely diary entry of him, and people do talk about Dickens, and there are a lot of aspects of the Rochester's history that actually I think are interesting to people. Regarding texts, I mean, I do adapt. So last year I wrote a Platinum Jubilee anthem, which the RSCM asked for the Platinum Jubilee of Her Majesty the Queen, and that has an alternative text in it, so a dual sort of text that you can choose whether it's a particularly liturgical text for the the church year or around the church year, or particularly towards the Jubilee. So that was the aim, that we would hope it would extend the life of the piece. Have you done that yourself?
Not to that extent. I have written, I've sometimes written on alternative words so that if I mention children, then if it's being sung by adults, I'll change children into Christians, so that right. They're not singing as children, but they're singing as Christians. But not to any great extent. No.
You should have one anthem which has an alternative text for every Sunday of the church year. Sing the same music every.
Well, yes. Let's not go down that line of liturgical settings in impropriety. Tommy, a blessing for today. That was lovely. What was the inspiration? The words?
Well, those again actually wrote myself, and the idea was.
It's the way forward.
The idea was.
And also, if you write the words yourself, you get more money.
You get about 20p more. So. The actual idea behind this was to write effectively like a kind of sermon in a piece. So it covers everything. And actually Bernard Schumann at Dulwich, where we recorded it with Ollie Lallemont, describes this as that. It's like a sermon because it sort of covers all the important issues of life in this text. So without trying to be too sort of lofty about it, it's a very hopefully singable text, and I hope a text that touches people.
Well, I hope that not only touches people, I hope that they use it and sing it, and through their performances of it will move others.
Thank you very much.
Peter,
Exactly.
what percentage of your output is driven through a personal creative urge rather than a financial incentive or deadline?
I think very little is a financial incentive, because I can tell you that I earn very, very little, because by writing church music you earn virtually nothing. You're doing it for the greater good, I think. Well, that's my experience. I don't have much of a creative urge just to write music, and I don't feel that I am particularly inspired by a sense of place. I was organist at Worcester Cathedral, for heaven's sake, with all the ghosts and all the good spirits too of the Three Choirs Festival, composers and supporters. Your grandfather, as one of them, indeed, and yet, I have to say, I didn't wander along the Malvern Hills humming themes and jotting them down before cycling off to the nearest pub in Tenbury Wells or something. That wasn't part of it. It's not part of it. So for me, it's more the people. It's the need to create for a group of people.
Yeah.
And I would say any piece that you ask me about, I will say, oh yes, that was for this person, or it was for that school choir, or it was as a response to this or that. So it's very much people driven. It's not money driven, and it's certainly not driven through my own desire to express myself and pour that onto an unsuspecting world.
That's really interesting, because I think choral music for me is the same. Commercial music, which is my main income, I liken it to spread betting, because you write a lot of music, and quite often you write a lot of music very fast. And maybe
I can feel the term, you throw a lot and see what stakes coming out soon. Am I right in thinking
well,
that
it's
might
kind of
be...
it's calculated, because you do get better as you go on at judging what's going to work and what circumstance. So I liken it to maybe when you begin and it's a 10% hit rate, and then you sort of whittle it down a bit, to a sort of 20% hit rate, and then it gradually kind of increases once you. And also, I think over time. So we had somebody online asking a question: how do you get music performed when you don't have contacts who can pull strings for you?
Really?
And I was so basically. I mean, from my perspective, I don't know what you feel. I basically composed for free for about 6 years while I was earning money doing other things. In my case, record producing, I was actually, I wasn't living off my family or anything. I was just actually earning money, pretty quite good money. I mean, recording, can be 2,000 quid a time, and you're doing quite a lot of them. I mean, it's quite well paid. And so I was doing that for a while after leaving university, while building up the composing. And when people say, composing, I do this and I expect my music to be played, I mean, nobody owes you anything. You have to create your own projects. You have to find your own ways of doing things. And most importantly, I don't know about you, I feel you've got to create your own thing that sounds a little bit like you. And, whether it's a slightly left field orchestration illustration or some texture that hasn't, like a sort of Whittaker, dual triads texture or something that is you, or composed in your particular way, in your case beautiful setting of melody with words that just melds together. I think it's really important that you are very practical about it, and nothing comes for free. I spend quite a lot of my commercial music budgets on players because that's what you have to do. I mean, some people would just sit in their bedroom and just do it all electronically, but to me that's not the reason I came to music. The reason I came to music was because I enjoyed that process of actually seeing it come to life. And
there is no point, to me, there is no point in filling 100 envelopes with your latest anthem and sending it to every choir master in Britain. That doesn't achieve anything except, well, I don't know what it achieves. You might get a hit, but I used to receive, as in my role particularly as director of music at Worcester Cathedral and Three Choirs Festival, artistic director, I used to get countless envelopes with compositions from people, saying, can this be sung by the cathedral choir, please? And quite often, most of the time, I'm afraid to say, these were not pieces which I would have put on, because I've got to find the right space for it. I've got to work at it. Quite often they're quite difficult. And I can see that these people are desperate for their music to have exposure. And I would want my music to be sung by cathedral choirs, but I think that, I want it for myself, but actually I'm quite happy just to write a piece, as I say, for people, maybe for a group or a choir, and then leave it at that. And it's amazing how it will find its own way forward.
This is so true, isn't it? And if you refine your technique, word does spread when something, and I think as a writer you really know when it works, don't you, Peter? I mean, in your heart of hearts you know when something works, I think.
Yes.
Obvious,
you think, oh, this one's going to be fine. I mean, I have had a few. There was one that I thought, oh no, this is magnificent, it's a real piece, and it was published, and I don't know of anyone who has yet sung it. Nobody's ever come and said, oh, we did this piece. I'm not going to even mention what it was, but it was I think a fine piece of writing. But but also we do know that composers say, well, I think this was my best piece, and we read their their memoirs or whatever, and they quite often say they think it was their finest piece. I think also, I might be getting this wrong, but I have a feeling that Rachmaninoff thought that the Bells was either his finest piece of work. Well, and people will not turn off the piano concertos, but they may well turn off the Bells.
It's very interesting. And we're not the best judge of our own work, in a way.
I think that's
once it's out there.
Nor also should we, nor should we prejudge.
Yes,
I think you it's all very well thinking that you're Beethoven and tearing your hair out and screwing up the paper and throwing it in the bin and starting again. But actually, you're better off just doing it, putting it out there, forgetting it, start something new. And let somebody else decide whether what you've written is rubbish, because you're very close to it as well when you've just written.
And this brings us on to the publishers, which somebody else asked a question about publishing. And it's very different in the commercial world, because commercial publishers, library publishers particularly, are on the lookout for new music all the time. So if you or I write a new piece of music, we send it in, absolutely fine. After a while you get your relationships and they come back to you and they ask for things, and that's now really high work. I don't really submit things anymore, but people at the beginning you can send stuff out. People expect to receive music because they're listening all the tape. They don't mind who wrote it. It's just the music they need, and so they don't mind if it's you or me and there's no name attached, and that's fine. But with the choral publishers, it's a little bit harder, because there is, as you say, so much stuff out there and so many people that want to be published, and publishers when you have a good relationship, we actually share 2 publishers. I worked out, is that right? RSCM, Timber and Boozy, a couple of things of Boozy.
Yes.
And once you have some successful pieces with a publisher, then there's a tree, and you can sort of hang more things on it, and it sort of works like that, doesn't it? But it's more of a kind of mystery as to how. But I really believe in this thing. If you have integrity, if your music has integrity, and it has something a little bit unique about it, people do find it.
It's also difficult. I don't know if you found that other composers come to you and ask for you to sort of would you introduce their music to your publisher? And I have done it because I think, well, people gave me a kind of opportunities at the beginning of my career, and I would like to do the same for them. But as often as not, the publisher will say, sorry, this is not good, and all I can say is, well, I put it in, I put it to the person, and their committee have decided that they don't want it, and
the best,
what more can you say?
The best publishers, and we both work with great publishers. The best publishers will send an incredibly tactful rejection letter, which is just it's not putting people off. I mean, it's very funny because my grandparents were both composers. When I was about 9 or 10, I thought it was normal that you joined the PRS when you were like 9 or 10. So I joined the PRS, and I got my thing, and I got my membership pack. And then I sent a piano trio to OUP.
Of course.
And a lovely, lovely lady, somebody Livonian, something I can't remember now, a long time ago, wrote the most gorgeous rejection letter saying, please send us your CV. We like this very attractive music. It was very, very nice. And I sent a CV back saying, I'm Tommy Hewitt Jones, and I'm 9 years old, and I'm
famous already.
No, it really didn't say that. But I've been composing for like 6 years or whatever it was, and they were like, or they said, well, come back to us in 10 years, And sure enough, 10 years later, I had a carol published by OUP, which was very kind of them. But it's they were very kind. I got a stinking one from Novello. I think I sent one to Novello at the same time. Stinking one. This is not appropriate for our catalogue. Full stop. Yours sincerely, and think, and so I think we've got to be kind. I mean, it's a general life facet, isn't it? We've got to be kind to each other, but I think especially with creativity, it's such a personal process. We have to be respectful to each other's creative process.
Now, if we were just to move on a bit, could I ask you, I am in the very selfish position of living with a partner, and I have a very reliant dog, a Norwich Terrier called Percy, who relies on me to feed him twice a day but doesn't like being walked. You have a sort of integrated and growing family life. How do you actually balance your composition with your family life? Because these are very different disciplines that you're putting into bringing to bear at the same time.
Bless you. Well, I'm very lucky. I have a lovely wife called Annie, and I have
Danny.
Annie.
Oh, Annie.
Yes, lovely wife called Annie, and 2 children. I've got 1 child on the way. So effectively, when I was in London, I wouldn't pretentiously call it my early period, but when I was in London, a bachelor.
My dear, this still is your early period.
When I was a bachelor in London, living in a bachelor flat, I made the point of, doing my London stuff and going into town, and I used to work on the fly. I've always worked on little laptops actually, so that I can be mobile, apart from when you're recording, of course, in the studio. But I used to go into town and have meetings with people, and try and kind of like, without being pushy about it, just like kind of catch up with people. And I've always seen the whole like networking thing as kind of just like, I have friends, you know what I mean? Like if you genuinely want to get to know people who have passions that are similar to yours, and I mean, I've always been very interested in publishing because of watching my grandfather be slightly roasted by one of the main publishers. Later in life, he sort of gave everything away and then never had any, anyway, that's another story. But so I tried to do that, and by the time we moved to Rochester, we were in Bromley before, by the time we moved here, I've sort of we don't really go into town very much. I mean, we occasionally have meetings in town, but effectively, and because of the internet as well, everything can be, I suppose because of Zoom over COVID as well, we've all got used to doing meetings on Zoom and things. So I suppose in terms of the practical elements of having a family, young family, I have a sort of process for writing myself, which I kind of class as slightly kind of ADHD. I'm not ADHD, but kind of I have a lot of pieces of music or bits, ideas I'm working on, sort of all going at the same time, and I have a sort of process I've developed myself that works for me, and we're all different, where I can open the laptop if I've got 5 minutes while I'm about to pick up the kid from school. I can open the laptop and do a bit of work and then instantly shut it down, and so I've learnt to do this because I used to have this process where you get interrupted by the postman, or someone comes in the house and suddenly you lose all your ideas, and that's a real thing. I don't know about you, Peter, I often wake up in the night and have to jot stuff down, and the thing about it is, like, I've taught myself to do this, so I can kind of open things up and just work for 10 minutes, shut it down, and that is my actual secret. The other thing I do is I have sort of what I call low intensity and high intensity time. So high intensity is...
It is a bit AH. What's the...
ADHD.
ADHD.
I mean, I'm not...
It's beginning to sound like, but no, I do appreciate exactly where you're coming from.
The thing is, I couldn't
do it myself.
No. So
we're very different. I'm very similar.
I'm very, very good at switching off. So if I were to say now I'm going to have a nap, I could literally go and I'd be asleep. I don't know why, and my wife can't do it, but I for better or worse, I've always been able to do that, sort of recharge, which is useful as well. But having these things ready to go and open, but this kind of high intensity, low intensity time, the high intensity work is kind of coming up with the melody and the words and doing the sort of high end creative stuff. Low intensity is the kind of working through the orchestration, which is much more of a kind of academic process.
I love that.
Does that make sense?
I love that bit.
So
what I love is once I've finished the creative bit, I absolutely love embellishing the organ part, adding
polishing the turd, as my wife would probably say.
I think that, yes, it may be the case with your music. The
nuts and bolts.
The nuts and bolts, yes. And I think for lots of people, once they've done the creative bit, they would actually just send it off to somebody else. It's like, and it comes back to, like the painting would come back to just at the end to Canaletto's studio, and he would just do the bits which make it unmistakably Canaletto, and that's
by committee.
That's probably the case.
It's funny, Peter, because all of the composers I admire, and I've got many living composers I really love and really respect, and all of them, without doubt, and I'm sure you're the same, take pride in the small details. Take pride in the finishing it and the making it, all lovely. In Hollywood, it's a very different experience. I was very lucky to go out there and work there for a while, and the composer drafts everything into a sequencer, so they have all the sounds there, and they do orchestrate their own work, by which you mean they kind of get the sounds they want. So you have a sort of patch of 6 horns, and you might play a chord, and that's fine, but the actual voicing is done by an orchestrator. So you're not actually, that whatever you jam it, whatever you get in there, as long as it works,
it will work, and it
will
fit,
work, because somebody will come in, you'll come in and actually finesse it.
Yes.
But the finessing is so important, and I think it's part of the composing process, personally.
And of course, that was what going back before these things were possible. That's why people like Malcolm Arnold and Vaughan Williams found an incredible challenge in writing scores for films, but they I think they had a sort of love-hate relationship with that genre.
That makes a lot of sense. And interestingly, when Britain dabbled with it, with things like Night Mail, it was a smaller ensemble. It was a little ensemble with side drums, percussion and things, but it wasn't that sort of epic orchestra, because we've got so used to that sort of Star Wars, 80-piece orchestra, and it does require more manpower to just do it so quickly. I think that's the speed is the thing.
And if you were writing, let's say you were going to write something for a medium-sized choir, and it was going to last for sort of 25 minutes and have a soprano soloist and a tenor soloist, and you wanted it to be done by choral societies throughout the country that need a 25-minute piece. Would you reduce the orchestration in your head? Would you feel compromised by that? Or would you say, damn it, I'm going to be Frederick Delius and they'll have the whole flippin' lot?
I think this is the practicality, isn't it? And this is where someone like Fauré was very astute, because they would have that small band orchestra, organ, violas, violin, and a little bit of brass. I mean, with I think the key to it is having different versions, isn't it? I mean, someone like John Rutter is very clever with his small orchestra, medium orchestra,
yes,
and piano organ versions of things, and I think that has to be
because each version, of course, has its own integrity, because it is the work of the composer. So when it's piano, the piano part is not necessarily a reduction of the orchestral part. It's actually written as a piano part. Yes, and I can see that yes, you're now giving me ideas. Actually, I should. I'm just thinking, of course, one of the things which happens is that, having conducted so many choral societies and choirs in my life, we very often would choose a piece of music, and then you have a sort of instrumentation for that piece of music and think, what can I have that goes with it? And then, of course, what goes with it might actually require an extra 2 flutes and a brass section or something. You think, well, my budget can't stretch to that. So, perhaps there's actually room for people to do a bit more pairing up.
Work out what pieces will be performed with it.
I'm sure it's been done.
Perhaps,
thought, yes.
Very interesting. Peter, I've got a question for you. How much does a personal connection or attachment to a place or person influence your writing?
I think place, not so much. I think I am certainly influenced by the personal connection. I would write a piece of music for somebody if I felt that it were the right thing to do for them, if it was part of a sort of almost a healing process as well, because very often music needs to have a connection. It's not necessarily always just a very jolly thing. It was interesting.
So we had another question from Facebook, Peter. How do you go about getting commissions? What's your response to that? I'll tell you mine in a minute.
How do I go about getting commissions? I sort of sit around and wait for them to happen. One of the things, this sounds awful to say, but if, for example, I receive an email, perhaps from a distant land, that maybe either the United States, where my music has been sung, or somebody has perhaps performed a piece, I will quite unashamedly thank them and follow up with another email saying, if you want me to write your very own anthem, then please feel free. I don't actually have a feel free to contact me. I don't have a website. I don't have recordings of my music out there, and I think I probably ought to. So I would say, from that particular point of view, I'm not taking it seriously enough. And I would be interested to hear what your response is to the same question.
Perhaps interestingly, it's not actually far off that, because I used to write a lot for free.
Yes.
And I don't anymore.
Yes, because you very generously gave me a Christmas carol. For our village choir.
That's very sweet of you. Peter very kindly commissioned a Magan Nunc when you were at Worcester. which was great fun.
It was spectacular as well.
You were very, very kind. And it got reviewed. Did you see that? There was a review in Choir and Organ saying they really enjoyed it, but it sounded at the end like Mary was sitting down with a bump. Did you hear that?
Yes.
But I mean, the thing is, as I'm sure you'll all find, everyone watching this, you forge friendships over the years, and you forge, you have wonderful relationships with wonderful people in your life, and through the music world, everybody is out there to help each other, I think. I like to think quite optimistically that people want everyone else to do well and have a nice career and a nice
I think
life.
some of them would like you to think that.
Yeah.
I think there are people who are
negative.
Well, not necessarily negative, but very, very protective. And
there are those. Yeah.
And
gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers. People who will not let you in. And I think a lot of these are people whose lives have shrunk musically.
Yeah.
People that have become too serious about their own composition and stopped being the wonderful performing musicians that they were, and they can then over focus on their own work.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because in the classical composing world, the process is so attached to ego.
Yes.
And whereas in the choral and the commercial worlds, you are a bit less precious about your work, I think, because you get used to writing. And I personally feel, to be a composer, you have to just write a lot, and you then learn the technique and how to do it, or experience music.
Because it is a craft.
It's a craft.
It's a craft, and I'm always amazed, Tommy. You are so imaginative and inventive from a harmonic point of view. I get terrified of, and yet when I improvise, I can improvise at the keyboard and take the harmonies everywhere, but I don't write it down. I think
there's a happy medium. There's a happy medium, isn't there, between? There's all the sort of Koshro bollocks, which is basically just bollocks. Koshro, very impressive sort of tremolandi and lots of octatonicism, etc., etc., and that's all great. But actually, there's a happy medium between something that's direct emotionally, isn't there? But you do that. You've got beautiful use of harmony and unexpected turns and all that lovely stuff. It's a funny old business. I feel that in the pop world, I've only dabbled in that so well, but the pop world people are very, very nice, because they're used to collaborating. And I really do feel that sometimes composers should be a bit nicer to each other. But it is, as a composition teacher I had once put it, the higher up they go, the nicer they are, and people are genuinely very lovely, and they just, if they can't help, they just don't have time. My grandfather sent a load of compositions to Benjamin Britten, and I've got this letter from Britten at home, which says, the Reds household, blah, 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 blah. And it says, "Dear Tony, I'm really sorry, I have no time to look at this because I'm currently writing my war requiem." It's like, so actually that's, no, but
that's a great letter to have.
It's a great letter, and he bothered to write back, and he bothered to say, "I'm really sorry, I'm too busy." And I respect that, because you know what it's like when you're totally immersed in something, you have to just plough through it.
Yes.
But I don't think Britain had mastered the whole ADHD style of writing.
No, quite. Tommy, tell me, what is the future of publishing? There's a huge question. For somebody who isn't a music publisher, from your point of view.
So from my point of view, I think we won't touch on it now, but I think AI is a huge threat to everything, but particularly the way that music is used and the way music is appreciated, and the way music's valued. Because if AI can just generate music, the whole value of art goes down. But in terms of publishing, publishers have to become a lot more astute to many things, but the delivery methods, particularly on social media, particularly TikTok, which is an evolving. The problem is, publishing is a very respected and a very traditional area, and all the contracts that you and I sign for choral music are very traditional. They don't deal with the current situation, which is companies, huge companies, conglomerates, multi-million pounds international companies, or Chinese, in this case of TikTok, Chinese companies evolving technology faster than you or I can possibly understand. You know, things like AI are just developing fast. There's, as we said earlier, there's stuff going on that is just so quick that we can't keep up with.
Yes, the trouble is now that it's developing faster than the people who had
the legislation.
Yeah,
right?
than the legislation.
And so publishers, what publishers really need to do is invest in keeping on top of all of that. And it's an evolving industry. It's a very difficult industry, but it's a very exciting industry. If we can get it right, it's incredibly exciting.
And is the whole sort of social media thing, is that our friend or is it our enemy?
It's a really good one, isn't it? I think so. I think it can be our friend, but also it can become a bit much. And the way I viewed it, which is not necessarily the right way, is just to try and be just to be my authentic self, right? And just to try and, obviously you can impart, you know, there's a concert happening tomorrow, do come if you're interested, kind of thing, but just to try and express yourself. So when I started, when I was 15 or whatever, you know, I put a website up, you know, back then, and it was all kind of like, next week Thomas will be doing a concert in the, you know, a third party, and I had a manager a bit later than that, you know, and they were sort of doing it from a third party. But the whole point of social media, I think, is that people want to know Peter, you know, they want to get to know you, and people do like your music and they want to get to know you as a person, you know. I think, you know, without sharing too much, I think it's a really good, wonderful connection with your audience. Do you agree?
I would say that's what I want to project with my sort of limited use of social media. Somebody said to me, you know, why do you not have an Instagram account? Because, you know, if you did, I'd be in touch with you more often. And I think, it's another thing on my list. Yes, I suppose I should, you know, because I think at heart I'm a Luddite, but also I'm not entirely. I don't just want to know a sort of Sunday supplement view of somebody's life. You know, what's Andrew Lloyd Webber's favourite colour, and you know what, you know, does how long does it take him to wear in his new pair of shoes and that sort of thing, which is what you do get with a lot of this sort of social media, that sort of prying sort of stuff into what is frankly dull.
Yeah.
But you know, nor do I want to wear my heart on my sleeve or show my inner secrets of what I really believe about music or performance. So I think that it can be not too beneficial. Sometimes it can be to our detriment.
It's a fine line, isn't it?
We have to be careful.
A friend of mine put it very well, actually. He said that he'd absolutely worshipped this solo violinist who was about to play the Paganini Caprices in the Barbican, you know, beautiful player, and I won't name who it was. And that morning they'd done an Instagram of them walking their dog, you know, or something, and it just sort of takes that godly image and just sort of like, oh, okay, it's normal, you know.
Yes, you really don't want to see Vivaldi cutting his toenails.
Quite.
Yeah.
There is a Facebook group called Composers Doing, Twitter account, Composers Doing Normal Shit, and it's quite fun. You know, it's Benjamin Britten playing tennis, and you know, Rostropovich walking his dog. You know, and it's funny, but I wouldn't want to see that every day. No,
I absolutely, because also what people want, you know, they think they want that, but actually they also want people to look up to revere. You know, I think that what social media has done with lots of performing artists like ourselves and you know, composers, but musicians, singers, is that it has taken away the mystery.
What is the future of choral music?
I think the future of choral music is possibly not necessarily in the countries where you would have associated with choral music. I think that nowadays choral music is waning in Britain, you know, without a shadow of a doubt. Choirs that I conducted years ago, 20, 30 years ago. I look at them now, I look at the photographs, and I recognise every single person, except that the number of the choir has gone from 70 to 40, because
That's
30
terrible.
of them have died. And
Terrible.
and there's nobody new. And they simply are not coming through. Churches, the church does not appreciate the music. They say they appreciate the music in the choir, but they don't support the mechanisms that keep it good, and they don't appreciate what is actually required.
You know, the idea of the Victorian sort of church organist, the centre of the community, you know, supporter of music theory and supporter of people's development and the whole community. And it's a wonderful example of what should come out of these local churches, you know, and just doesn't elsewhere. It's such a shame.
I think that's true. Whenever I start to talk about this, it's reassuring to know that whenever I mention it, somebody will always say, yes, well, of course, in my village there's a church that has 20,000 sopranos, and it is true that there are sort of notable examples dotted around.
And All Saints, West Dulwich, the other side of Dulwich, wonderful Ruth Holton and their very strong choir, you know,
that
fantastic.
we're both very connected with, and we love what they do as well. But you know, where I live in West Dorset, there are various team ministries, because it's quite rural.
Does that mean that one person presides at various churches, or how does
yes,
it work?
usually one incumbent with possibly help. Then, of course, because of where it is, a lot of retired people live there, including retired clergy, so they're roped in to do quite a lot of the work. So we rely on retired clergy to maintain services in the smaller parishes. But I can tell you that in the Bridport team at the moment, I believe there are no choirs singing regularly in any of the churches in the Bridport team. In the Beaminster team, there's one choir in the main town in Beaminster, which is really a large village / small town, and there are no choirs in any of the others.
To me, it's a massive irony, because the one thing we really lack these days is a sense of community. And so my wife's Italian. In Italy, we have the piazza. And if you've got nothing to do of an afternoon, you go to the piazza, have a gelato, have a glass of wine, and you just meet people and you chat and you hang out, you know, and there's a community. And in the same way, the amateur choral scene is a wonderful community. Here in Rochester, they've got a very strong amateur choral society, and it just brings people together. It is the most wonderful thing. And I think that while we are all, you know, human beings with our faults, and we've got things like death, I mean, you know, we are mortal, and we need the time to bond. We need these bonds, you know, not just our family and our close friends on social media, but we need to hang out once a week, sing together, have a wonderful sort of, as it were, community type experience, communal experience.
I think that communal experience of singing is quite strong, particularly in I would say, using a funny expression, is choirs who do not sing to music. You know, there's a lot of growth in community choirs, and it has been for a good number of years now. Inspired by work of Gareth. That's right, and the Military Wives. And I think that for children there are groups like Stagecoach, which of course work on singing, but it's not singing to music. Like many of the kind of male voice tradition is that you would learn your part, and you would sing your choral part, and then you stand in your blazer with your hands by your side and face the front, and the singing is wonderful. And that's not the choral, that's part of the choral tradition, but it's not the part that you and I have worked in all of our lives. And the part that we have worked in is being eroded
Yeah, and I don't think it's helped by TV talent shows, which kind of over sanitize singing, and they highly edit things, and they make it almost expected to have perfection when you're having, a performance by a choir. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's about the message of the music and the heart of it, and being part of something. I feel very strongly about it.
And there are things that, we know that in certain areas of music that there is growth. I was reading only today that, and I think probably, it's owing to the great number of sort of pianos in spaces now. There are lots of people taking up piano lessons.
Isn't it wonderful?
And adults taking up piano lessons. This is fantastic. But maybe we'll be able to compose music for them. Is there a Thomas Hewitt Jones piano tutor? Does it exist?
No, I'm actually working on a cello book with wonderful Alison Moncrief Kelly, who's been teaching here, and we re-met because she, we've got various connections. Her mum used to once gave me a masterclass on the cello when I was about sort of 8 or something, and she's a fantastic musician. And we're actually writing a cello volume.
Well, that's great because also you because you have a great knowledge of stringed instruments. I think that it means that she's an expert, you're a composer, but you're an expert on the cello as well. Even though you don't play the cello, you probably play the cello, but it's not your. It's not.
Well, she's quite incredible. Her parents, her dad was a concert pianist, and her mum was a fantastic cellist and teacher. So it's quite a lineage on her side.
But Tommy, it's worth my saying that I remember many years ago when you were young, somebody saying that they had made a telephone call to your house on Christmas Day.
I don't know this.
And they phoned your house on Christmas Day and asked to speak to either your mother or father, I can't remember, but in the background there was audibly the sound of at least 4 different lots of instrumental practice going on at 9:30 on Christmas morning. Well, I've got to hand it to you. I don't know if that was true.
No, we had a joke because my parents used to teach as well. I don't think they were teaching on Christmas morning, but they taught in each room. You see, there was 1, 2, and then there was a third room, and they all had pianos in. And the piano tuner gave them sort of a special prize because he said it counted as a music school. So many pianos around the house.
Okay.
But I don't know. It's really a love, isn't it? I mean, like you, music is a total passion. I mean, it always has been, and just I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was very young. Just to wind up then, because we're probably running out of time. What do you think our messages from today should be? I mean, I think if you're for composers coming up, as it were, into the world, I think it's important to find your voice. It's such a cliche, but to have integrity of vision and know, anyone can write music like a GCSE composition or whatever, but it's about creating something that is so perfect in its form. Benjamin Britten always worked at the form first, but it's got to have intention, hasn't it? It's got to have integrity and intention. Those are my 2 words.
I would say, in closing, for young composers coming up, the most important thing is that they have great integrity and sort of thrust in what they write, and that they put energy into that, but that they equally work with other musicians. And it's absolutely crucial that they develop, that they do not think that piano playing was something that they did through university to diploma level, but actually that it's quite important for them to, if somebody says, can you accompany me on Poulenc's flute sonata, that they do that, because that will inspire, but it will also inform their own composition. So it's keep being a practical musician, and 100%. Yes, you 100% agree, but it's do it 100% and do your composition 100%. It's completely and utterly integrated. It worked for Bach.
Agree.
And it would work for you.
Absolutely agree. What a wonderful way to end. Peter,
Thank
it's been such a joy talking to you. Thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure, and we've still got some wine left.
Cheers.
Thanks.